All right. So folks, you know a little bit about me. I would love to learn a little bit about you guys in the audience. Can I just start? I'd love a show of hands. Who here uses Twitter on a weekly basis? Okay. What do we got? We got about 50% of the audience, I'd say. Thank you very much. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Twitter, I'll just give you a brief background. Twitter began with a sketch on a piece of paper, a status update, a site for people to share the latest happenings in their life. This has evolved over a number of years now into, well, people share all sorts of things, and this is food porn. This is actually the first time that I made carbonara. And so there's things that people share on Twitter that are part of their everyday life, and there's also things that people share on Twitter which are breaking news. What we've seen over the years at Twitter is that more and more events around the world break on Twitter. And in this case here, David crash landed here in SFO just a few short months ago. And the first thing that you do, of course, when you get out of a plane that's crash landed is you turn around, take a photo, and then you tweet it. If you're ever in that situation, make sure your fellow passengers are safe. But it just goes to show, if you look at the engagement here, that we had 32,000 retweets on this and 4,000 favorites. So not only did the news break on Twitter, but it actually had a ton of engagement as well. What we've also discovered over the years since that original status update that was simply 140 characters of text was that pictures convey so much more. The picture here, if you're not familiar, if you're from one of our friends from overseas that's joining us at Summit, this picture was after the presidential election last year. And what's interesting here is if you look at the engagement, if you look at the feeling that was in this photo, it had a massive impact on the Twitter sphere. Nearly 800,000 retweets and nearly 300,000 favorites. This was a particularly key moment just shortly after that election. But today, Twitter is more than 140 characters. Twitter is more than just photos. Today, we have Vine, which is a product that we launched earlier this year, and within the span of a few short months, we'd had over 40 million users. You can see that Vines are hypnotic videos. There's all sorts of things that people capture on Vines, but like the constrained media of 140 characters, a Vine is limited to 6 seconds and it loops. And so that's kind of a theme that you'll see across a number of the Twitter products that we have. There's also Twitter Music. There's a whole lot more that we have going on. And so, again, for those of you that are not familiar with Twitter, this quote is one that really resounded with me. It was Arianna Huffington of the Huffington Post, and she talks about how Twitter, you add up an accumulating series of now moments, and what you have is history. And I thought that was really powerful because that's something that resonates with myself and with a lot of other people at Twitter. You know, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to contribute? And so Twitter today is 140 characters and so much more. It's an ongoing stream of events and moments across the world. It's the history of the world. So why is that so important? Well, we have a tremendous challenge ahead of us as we scale. As we see ourselves growing across the world into different geographies, different markets around the world, used by people with different languages, we've had to scale the service and we've had to build out an engineering team to support that. This is what happens if you don't scale. Is there anyone here that's familiar with this image? We've got a few people. Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar, this is the fail whale. This is an image that was actually drawn by an Australian artist a number of years ago, and it was actually used by Twitter to show when twitter.com was down, when the service was unavailable. It was a fail. We'd stuffed up. This was a concern for us, and it's something that we wanted to avoid, clearly. And so this was an example of what happens when you don't scale. And this is an example of what happens when you do scale. November 6, 2012, a little after 8 p.m. local time here, we hit a new record for tweets per second. It was just over 15,000 tweets per second. To give you a feel of where we've come from, this sort of number in the past would have been a fail. We would have had the fail whale. But our engineering team had grown and stepped up and scaled to be able to address this. And so shortly after the US presidential election, 15,000 tweets per second. Fast forward to August this year, and there was a show screening on Japanese television. It's called Castle in the Sky. It's a Japanese animation film from 1986. Japanese animation film from 1986 that was screened to an audience in Japan got 10 times, nearly 10 times the volume of the US presidential election less than 12 months later. So the rate and the pace with which we are growing is phenomenal. And that's why it's so important that we're keeping on top of the growth of the service and scaling our company as a result. So how do we do this? Well, for anyone here that's got a bit of a background interested in the technology side, I just wanted to touch on this briefly. We started with a monolithic Ruby on Rails application. Allows you to get to value really quickly and take that piece of paper, that status update that we had, that was a prototype, a paper prototype, and turn it into something that people could use. As we had millions and millions of people around the world using our service, that no longer worked. And so what we actually ended up doing was breaking down this one big application into many different services that were written in another language called Scala. This is how we managed to scale our service, all right? Taking one big monolithic Ruby on Rails application, breaking it into many hundreds of services that each do a small portion of twitter.com, user sign up, photos, retweets, things like that. But of course, technology is only half the battle, right? We can solve the technological challenges, we can get rid of that fail whale, but if we're not focusing on the people, of which we were also scaling, then we would have set ourselves up for failure. So to give you an idea of the size of our engineering organization, we have around just over 1,000 people in engineering at Twitter. We have a number of products that we look after, and what you're seeing here is a bit of a graph of the connections between the people, some of the people at least, in that engineering organization. So if you can think of collaboration at scale, if you can think of agile at scale, if you can think of some of these problems in an extremely fast-growing company, we've seen them all. And the one that we're going to focus on today is how we got collaboration and alignment across the whole company. So, switching tacks, company alignment. You've got all these people, you're managing to solve these technological problems around scaling the service. How do you scale the people? How do you make sure that the organization is growing as fast as the business, as the service is? It all starts with a vision. And this is our vision. This is Tahrir Square, and Tahrir Square was the center of the Arab Spring. Why is this the vision for us? Well, at Twitter, we want the communication and the conversation and the discussion that took place at Tahrir Square. We want to foster that and facilitate that conversation around the whole world. Our vision is to be the global town square. The reason that is so important to us, the tweeps incidentally is what we call ourselves at Twitter, we are tweeps. The reason it's so important to us is because that vision is what provides us alignment from the top of the company all the way down to the bottom. Every individual on every team. So when we talk about alignment, we've got this vision, and from that vision, we break it down into our goals. Now, there's a number of ways that people approach goals. If you're familiar with Salesforce, Salesforce has the V2MOM, the vision, the values, the methods, the obstacles, and the metrics. Atlassian has a different approach, the VTFM. Everyone's got their own approach to this. I'd just like to get a show of hands. Who here is at a company that does do a yearly or a quarterly planning process? Are you for real? Is that all? Not every hand went up? Okay. So that's about 80% of the people, I think. Put your hands up again. Who reviews those goals and the progress on a quarterly basis? Okay, a few less hands. Who visualizes, maintains, and manages all of that in Jira and Confluence? 10 hands. Okay, so you guys, you 10, you might be able to share with me how we can take this further forward. For the rest of you, I'm going to share with you our approach to managing our goals using Jira and Confluence. When we talk about goals, we talk about goals. Goals, you might ask? Well, everything at Twitter is named after a bird. Everything at Twitter is named after a bird. The meeting rooms, the kitchens, short of the bathrooms, in fact, but everything else is named after a bird, including our services. So we have Ostrich, and Ostrich is a statistics collection service for Scala. We have IBIS, and IBIS is a notifications infrastructure. Thankfully, Wikipedia lists over 9,000 bird species, so we've got a long way to go. But anyway, goals. Goals are goals. Goals are Twitter's version of OKRs, objectives and key results. If you're familiar with objectives and key results, if you're not, they were written down originally by Andy Grove in his book High Output Management. The objective answers the question of where do we want to go? Where are we heading? What's the direction? And the key results, how will we know when we're getting there? Now, an objective might span a number of quarters. An objective for one particular team, or indeed for the company, may span 2, 3, 4 quarters or beyond a year. The key results are generally things that we are impacting and affecting within that quarter boundary. So when we look at our company goals, our whole company goals process, we start right from the top with our company objective, or objectives in this case. For this quarter, for instance, we have 4 company objectives. Below that company objective, or below each of those company objectives, we have key results. Falling under each of those key results, we have group objectives. Under those, the group key results. Under those group objectives and key results, we have team objectives and team key results. And so this cascades down throughout the organization. The reason that this is so important is we've got that vision, the global town square. And as we cascade down and feed back up what teams are working on, we've got alignment across the whole company. And of course, the alignment is what packs power and efficiency. If you're not aligned as a business, if all your groups, all your teams, if the whole company is not heading in one direction, how can you be effective? How can you deliver? So with that in mind, I wanted to turn attention to how we solve this and how Atlassian helped us solve this problem. To reiterate, our vision is the global town square. What we've done is we've used tools to help us foster alignment across the business. We've used tools to help us change the behavior across the company. So some people say tools, like is it really about the tools? It's about the practice, it's about the process, it's about the culture. It is, it's about all of those things, but the tooling is the one that we're focusing on this afternoon. Reason being, the tooling really allows us to collaborate clearly across the org. So before we dive into this, let's just have a look at where we were before Atlassian. Before Atlassian, we would use Google Docs extensively. And in a Google Doc, you would have, for each team, this is actually a Google Doc that's a presentation. For each team, you would have one slide. And this slide for a team would show their quarterly goals, their backlog, as well as any blockers or dependencies. You're trying to tease out, okay, one, under those quarterly goals, what are the key results for this team for the quarter? 2, under the backlog plan, what are the things that they are working on to support those quarterly key results? You can see under the backlog plan that we have green and we have red, we have add and we have drop and we have done. So obviously if it's green, it's done, that's good. If it's dropped, it's red. Might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. Maybe we started doing the wrong thing and we learned something, but we still want to visualize that. And we also had those things that we added and those things that perhaps were in progress or we hadn't started yet. The blockers was an interesting piece. This was really, what are my dependencies on another team? We weren't trying to visualize incoming and outgoing dependencies, just the outgoing dependencies. What are my dependencies on other teams? Before Atlassian, we used email. And you can see here that this is a status update email, status for some project. I should point out that everything here has been cleansed, so the data does look a bit stale or uninteresting. But essentially, you can imagine the date that it was updated, red, yellow, green on the status at a high level, an executive summary, some of the items, and below that, the milestones. All of this stuff was written by hand. It was updated on a weekly or every 2 weeks. It meant that it was inconsistent quite often between teams. And so you'd look at one slide and you'd grok it, you'd understand what's going on, and then you'd see the next slide and it was slightly different. And so you had to go back and recalibrate. What am I looking at again? Where's the right thing? The other thing, of course, was that it was immediately out of date. It was never reflecting reality. It had to be updated or recently updated to reflect reality. And of course, that was a fail. So like we'd failed with Twitter.com in maintaining uptime and reliability years ago, we hit this wall where, at the scale of our company, it no longer made sense to use this approach. We needed something better. So enter Atlassian, how we manage to scale. Remember this structure with the company goals. We're now going to take a look at how we set this up using Jira and Confluence. Key thing to remember in all this, structure with the tools. The tools is what gave us the structure, enabled us to change the behavior across the organization. And at scale, changing people's behavior very quickly in a matter of months it's so important. So we had consistency. We had the automated reporting across the whole organization, no more manual updates. Of course, it was automatically updated in every location that the information was displayed. You know, pull in the latest information all the time, and it was deterministic. No more, is this red, is this green? Well, I think it's red, I think it's green, this is my opinion, your opinion. It was based on the actual status in Jira. So, let's have a look at the tools we used. Obviously, we're using Jira and we're using Confluence. On top of Jira, we had 2 key plugins to facilitate this, and they were Jira Agile add-on and also Script Runner. Huge shout out to the gentleman that does Script Runner. It's a thankless task, it's an open source plugin, and Jamie has been maintaining it for years now, so he's an absolute champion. On top of Confluence, we use the presentation macro and a few of the other inbuilt macros. Just in terms of these add-ons, if you don't have them, you can always get them at the marketplace, marketplace.atlassian.com. You can always request your system administrator install them as well. One thing to keep in mind, in our world, the approach that we took was a key result is equal to an epic in Jira. So for all of those team key results that we looked at, each of those team key results came across into Jira. And I'll show you that now. So here we have Jira Agile. Jira Agile obviously is what gives us epics. And you can see here that there's a team. In Twitter, one team equals one project. So every team has their own project. The issue type, of course, is epic, and the epic gives us 2 key things. They want the epic name and they want the status. We've added a little bit more information. When we create our epics to represent our key results, we have a special field there, the key results field. We also capture the fixed version. What quarter are we trying to deliver this in? What quarter are we trying to satisfy this key result? Is it Q3, Q4, Q1 2014? Not only that, we provide components, because quite often the team will have key results that relate to different components over time. And of course, there's the links. What are the incoming, what are the outgoing dependencies that we have? This is really important. Having a screen specific for this is really important because it's what enabled us to have consistency. Now the data was all being input in the same way every time for every team. All of those epics that we had, which represented the key results, are actually ordered on a backlog, on a Jira Agile board. So each team will have their own board in Jira Agile, a Scrum board, and down the left-hand side of that board, they've got the epics column there, and that's where they drag to reorder their epics. What we're trying to do, and in fact what every team does, is they order from the most valuable, most important key result down to the least valuable, least important. Now obviously there's degrees, and those least valuable things for this quarter, for Q4, might roll over into Q1 next year, or they might not. Hopefully we deliver them all in this quarter, but if we don't deliver them all, it's the least important things, the least valuable things that get dropped, rather than the high value stuff that we fail to deliver. So that's why the ordering of these epics, of these key results, is so vital and so important. Just as an aside, we use Agile extensively, both Scrum and Kanban practices at Twitter. If anyone's interested in that, if you've got things to share about how you do it, I'd love to chat with you afterwards as well. Beyond the epic and the ordering of that epic, we actually have a special workflow. Our regular workflow that we have in Jira for the engineering teams has a lot of automation aligned with it. We try to have as much automation as possible, in fact, and obviously we saw some of that in the keynote this morning. So what we've done is we have an entirely separate workflow just for the epics. And you can see here that some of the key things are, it's open, as in it's on our backlog. Maybe it's an idea for a future quarter. Accepted is something that we're going to commit to delivering in this quarter. This is a key result we want to deliver in the current quarter. In progress is something for the current quarter that we're clearly working on at the moment. We also have shipped and resolved, or shippable, sorry, shippable and resolved. Shippable is actually something that we use for our teams that are on iOS and Android development, because in that scenario, they may have delivered that piece of work, but it might be waiting for delivery to the Play Store or the Apple App Store. And then, of course, resolved is the final state that all of these epics will end up in. Things can go directly from open to resolved. Maybe we cancel them and they're marked as won't fix. But on the other hand, most everything will go through a fairly open, accepted, in progress, resolved approach. One thing to note, the resolve step changes the epic status field in Jira Agile to done. And doing that actually takes that epic, that key result, off the team's board. So it's just a way to tidy up after ourselves as teams complete the work. I mentioned the fields earlier. Here's a Jira view issue page. A couple of key things to point out here. The assignee is generally the engineering manager of the team that's responsible for delivering this. The reporter is quite often the product manager or the product owner for that team. You can see we have the fixed version, 2013 Q3. We use labels, we use components. We have our key result field, which is really important because that's measuring, how do we know that we've achieved what we set out to achieve? And then, of course, we have our description, the issues in the epic, all that other stuff that's managed primarily in Jira Agile. That key result field is really important for us because that's the key result field that says, it's the second part of that question, right? How will we know that we're getting there? And that's what we're looking at and measuring throughout the quarter. The Jira links is the interesting bit. This is where we come into the cross-team dependencies, the incoming and the outgoing dependencies. I have a dependency on another epic for another team. Now, strictly speaking, if this other team isn't delivering it in this particular quarter, that's probably a red flag immediately. I'm depending on something for my quarterly key results that may not deliver this quarter. So it's a great way to actually visualize this and have a discussion early on in the quarter, or indeed perhaps before the quarter's begun, rather than getting halfway through the quarter and finding out that that thing that you thought you were depending on is not actually going to deliver in time. So again, having these links helps us align as a company, helps us have these conversations early and make sure that we're all on the same page. So just to recap on Jira, we've got the epic issue type. We're ordering our epics, which represent our key results, on the Jira Agile board. We've got a specific workflow that has no automation around it, that's just for epics. We've got screens to ensure that we capture the same information from every person, every team, every time. We've got fields that make sure that we're capturing the right information around key results. And we've got the links to show the incoming and outgoing dependencies between the teams. So Jira manages all that incoming information. Confluence is how we share what's going on with the world, with the whole team, with the whole company. These are our company goals. And so this is just a Confluence page. And what you see here on this Confluence page is all written out as text. On the company level, on the group level, there's no Jira. We've felt that at this point in time at least, there's no need to put that into Jira. That's just something that we have on a Confluence page, and we can grade ourselves against our key results just as easily on this Confluence page. What you can see that we've got our 2013 Q3 company goals. We've got our first objective there. We actually give it a short title, but the objective, our key results below that. Then you'd go on to 2, 3, and 4 key objectives for Q3. As we go down to the teams, we basically have each of the major areas across the organization and the teams within those. So again, the pages here, the Confluence pages that we have and that we're linking to, are predominantly text until we get to the team level. And when we get to the team level, what we see is that we've got a page for each team. So every team that's doing their goal, well, every team in the company now, that's doing their goals, they have a page, and that page pulls in a couple of key things. At the top, we've got our 2013 Q3 goals for this particular team, for Gazebo. We've got our 3 objectives that this team is aiming to deliver in this particular quarter, or as I said, sometimes these objectives will span 2, 3, 4 quarters. And then below that, we've got our status, summary, and key result. This is a Jira issues macro, and it pulls that information in directly from Jira whenever this page is loaded. So whenever you go to view this information, you're always looking at the latest information. Is it in progress, or is it resolved? Has it been cancelled? Has something been added? If you ever want to check what a team is up to, what they're working on, where does my dependency sit with another team? You've got the one place to go, goals for that team. Just on this page, how we build it, there's a couple of things I wanted to point out. Confluence does this extremely well. You can actually copy and paste the URL out of Jira, paste it into Confluence, and it'll automatically create a Jira view issues macro for you. It's really neat. What we actually found is that we wanted a bit more control over it. One of the key things here is that we wanted to select the columns that were pulled out. So as you can see, we've got status, summary, and key result. We also wanted to set in the style there, static. If you use the dynamic style, it'll actually allow people to come onto that page and click the header for one of those columns and reorder that list. And as we looked at earlier, we've already ordered that list in terms of highest value to the company first, and we did that in Jira Agile. So we don't want someone coming onto this page and arbitrarily just reordering this list. And that's why we use the static style here. So just to go back 1 second, this is what we use for quarterly rhythm, the quarterly boundary with our teams. Throughout the quarter, we've got other activities. We've got our check-ins. What's this team been up to? How are they progressing towards their goal? And that's where, sorry, I'm just going to skip through. That's where the presentation macro comes into play. So the launch meeting is a meeting that takes place every week. And in this meeting, each team is, in fact, providing an update. We have the A team, the B team. Depending on how big we grow, we might have the C team and so on. But essentially, it's an opportunity for the teams in this group, in this meeting, to present what they've been working on, demo their stuff, share a status update with essentially the execs. I won't say the execs, but people at a higher level in the engineering group, so they know what's going on. So what you see here at the top, you see instructions, view presentation, cool team in NYC, and then a Q3 backlog. The instructions in the view presentation are really key because we're actually using the presentation macro. I'll show you that in a minute. But these are things that are available for any team or any group across the company to put on their own page, copy and paste, in fact include another page, so that they can roll their own presentation. They can roll their own status meeting very easily, very quickly. Below that, you see Cool Team in NYC and Q3 backlog. Imagine that going all the way down through another 20 or 30 teams, and you've got an idea of what this launch meeting looks like. We build that page by using an excerpt include. So the presentation macro, as I said, is available on the marketplace, marketplace.atlassian.com. By default, it has one style. And so we use the excerpt include to actually include another page that has a whole lot of styling and also a little bit of JavaScript as well as our instructions. And we can include that in any page where we want to do this launch meeting style, this presentation style, and it's consistent across the whole company. Below that, you can see the macro for the presentation macro, and you can see Team A, this is like Cool Team in NYC, the Jira Issues macro, and a horizontal rule. Every time you see a horizontal rule, that is a new slide. And we go through these slides, as you can imagine, 20 or 30 teams, once a week to get their status update. Here's an example of what it looks like in the presentation macro mode. So this is a Confluence page that's just been styled. It's based on a Jira Issues macro and the results out of Jira. So anytime you go into any meeting, you automatically pull up the latest information and you automatically get it for free in the same consistent style. Everyone, everywhere. Things to note. Down the far left-hand side there, you'll see the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is something that we add in. We want to prioritize it. The Jira Issues macro today doesn't give us that numbering of the ordering. So we just add that in using the presentation macro. We've then got our summary, our key result, and of course on the far right, we've got the status with the resolved, in progress, or you can imagine it might be resolved red if it had been cancelled. So there's a few different options there. It means it's deterministic, and of course it's automatically pulled from Jira. To give you an idea of what this looks like in a session, we have, in this case, there was about 20 people sitting around a boardroom table. On one side, we had the video conferencing, and on the other side, we had Confluence with the presentation macro. And this is quite a common sight. We'll be dialing in someone from a remote office, perhaps, or in this case, it was someone from an airport lounge, and we'll all be going through this together. You can see, if you look closely in the bottom of the Confluence page there that's got the presentation macro, you can see a few little red squares, and that's basically denoting that these are 3 items that this team cancelled early on in the quarter. They learned something, and they decided, we've got to visualize this and share this with everyone. These are cancelled. We're not doing it anymore. Now, of course, it's great because we've got the links. Anyone that's linked to that issue, they're going to be notified about what's going on. They're watching that, hey, I've got a dependency. It's been cancelled. All right, I need to change my plans. So it allows us to update and respond really quickly. So when we look at Confluence, we've built some templates or some blueprints for both the company and the group goals and how to visualize that so it's consistent, and then also for the team goals. We're using the excerpt include macro to make sure that we pull in the same presentation style, JavaScript for some little actual nifty things that we do on the side, as well as instructions into every page. Jira Issues macro, of course, and the presentation macro. So that's Confluence. So compare and contrast. You know, we started out and it was a free-for-all. Now we've got the consistency across the whole company. We've got Jira Agile, we've got the script runner. Script runner, incidentally, allows us to pull some reports on dependencies. Makes it easy for a team to visualize their dependencies with some new issue functions. It's really neat. Confluence, of course, we got the Jira Issues macro, the presentation macro. If you want to, none of this stuff is secret source. Happy to share any more information about it, as well as the JavaScript and the CSS that we've got for our presentation macro. Or perhaps, it's open source, so perhaps we could even contribute it back. That's something to think about. So what has that meant for us? Well, it's been tremendously successful for us on a number of levels. One thing to note with Twitter, though, we are on a constant trip. We want to always look for opportunities to improve. Continuous improvement is the name of the game. And so what you've seen here today, what I've shown you, is just a taste of what's going on. We're already looking at ways to take this further, to get better visualizations around our dependencies and what's going on, to get better reports. So where we are today is not going to be representative of where we are in 3, 6, 9 months' time. One thing if there's anything that you take away from this, it's that try something different all the time. You know, find something that works, sure, but change it up every couple of months, as fast as your company can at least, you know, consume that change, and constantly look for opportunities to improve. I don't know where we're going to be on 1st of January 2014 and how many tweets per second we're going to do. But one thing that I do know for sure, with Atlassian backing us and providing a foundation for us to scale our company, with Jira and with Confluence providing consistency across the whole company, we've got a much better footing to grow our whole organization. And so with that, I wanted to leave you with a couple of key takeaways. I mentioned tools. Quite often I say it's not about the tools, certainly in the world of Agile, but in this case, it is possible to change behavior with tools, and we've done that very successfully in a short period of time. Jira is providing the consistency, Confluence is providing the visibility, and the visibility is also key for that feedback loop to change people's behavior. Through this change, for us, we've managed to align the whole company, and so that's been tremendously powerful. I'd love to learn how you guys do it in your teams, in your companies. I'd love to learn what questions you have. If you can tweet me in 140 characters or send me a Vine, 6 seconds on video, and share your story with me, that'd be fantastic. You can reach me at @njm, and I'd like to thank you very much for your time.